So I studied Romance languages here in Louvain at UcLouvain in Saint-Louis in Brussels, mostly French as a French language teacher. From this I did my PhD at UcLouvain in computer-assisted language learning mostly. During my PhD I mostly focused on studying the effectiveness and the use of dialogue-based computer-assisted language learning, in other words, chatbots or conversational AI for language learning. So using chatbots, using dialogue systems, using smart speakers like Alexa, Siri, or non-playing characters in games to see how effective this kind of practice, this kind of either written or spoken but mostly spontaneous practice can be useful for language learning, and whether we can measure the effect there, whether we can see effects in different areas of language learning, whether it's in terms of proficiency, oral proficiency, for example, or in terms of more better knowledge of the language, better pronunciation or fluency, things like that. In terms of experience, I've been mostly active in Ecuador, where I was teaching at the Central University of Ecuador, where I was a French and English language teacher trainer. We'll see the value of it in terms of a place where you can practice meaningfully and productively the language you're learning without having to worry about the other person, what they will think about you. So a low anxiety environment where you can really practice, but not practice with just exercises that we know are good to improve your knowledge of the language, but they're not enough to really raise your productive abilities in the language, right? So the main advantages of conversational AI or chatbots for language learning, I think most people can spontaneously think about them. It's like they allow you to have a productive place, a productive practice on these systems that otherwise would be quite difficult to practice by yourself. We know that most of the practice we usually do on language learning, whether it's on paper or on apps, is usually focused on form, whether it's focused on vocabulary or grammar, and it's rarely about trying to have a message that you want to take across, and you have to force yourself to put that into words and sentences and messages and really try to interact with another person. Of course, it's ideal to practice that with another person, but for most beginner learners, it's typically difficult for them to pass the anxiety and the stress that comes with speaking orally in a foreign language that you're not mastering yet. And having the opportunity to practice that in a very low anxiety environment where hopefully the system can also help you with the beginning of a sentence, or here are some keywords that you could use, and also take the time of having you repeat as many times as you want without getting angry at you because you still cannot express yourself. The fact that you can practice in this low anxiety environment is really key. So we know that it has a lot of potential for language learning. We also know that technologically, at least until 1.5 years ago, it was very challenging to nail it correctly in terms of interaction, that the interaction would feel natural and meaningful and logical, and that you would be able to feel understood by the system. Nowadays it's starting to get more and more effective and more it's working better every time thanks to the advances in generative AI, large language models. We can see that systems like ChatGPT or Gemini are totally able to react upon and meaningfully and relevantly on many things that you are saying, but we still need to work on how to make it the most effective for language learning. For example, spontaneously a ChatGPT or Gemini system will not provide you with appropriate corrective feedback, will not correct you if you make a mistake. It will not tell you, oh, here you should have better said it like this, or there you pronounced this word wrong. It will actually believe or assume that everything you're saying is correct and just go with it. And so we actually want a system that is tailored for language learning to correct the learner, and that's not yet implemented in a perfect way by many systems. So that's one limitation of systems. How do you implement, or a challenge I would say, how do you implement corrective feedback? Another challenge is also how you adapt to the level of the learner. Right now, even if you can, with the prompt, try to guide ChatGPT or something like that to adjust to a lower level, it's still not necessarily as precise and as low as it would need to be for a beginner learner to totally understand the interaction and be able to join in a simple interaction. So it's quite difficult to adjust the level of difficulty, but that's super important for learning. It's really important that a beginner can really have simple sentences, both in what they have to understand as well as in what they have to express. And so having systems that would adjust the level of difficulty of the interaction to the right level, that is super important, and it's not yet there. And the last limitation of these systems is we can very well see spontaneously that it will be useful for many learners to practice the language productively, meaningfully in that context, but we aren't sure how long they would spontaneously do it if we are not forcing them to do it. And this is typically the kind of practice that you would want outside the classroom for learners to do autonomously, because inside the classroom they can already interact with their peers or with the teacher, or whether in whatever kind of environment that they're practicing there. But we want them to also be able to practice outside the classroom and to want to do it because it's interesting and useful and effective. And we aren't sure yet how to make sure that they actually want to continue practicing in these contexts. So my first recommendation would be, right now focus on task and interaction design. How do you integrate the conversation and the technology in a story, in a context, in an environment, and with tasks that make sense and that are both interesting and useful for the learners, and not just focusing on technology and then, well, we'll take the content part with someone else. Or the task design is really the key to make it work. And this also goes for motivation and aspects like how do you make people want to continue using it. The solution to this is not simply gamifying the environment by giving badges and points, and that will be enough to make them continue to use it. The tasks are the key, and the tasks have to be interesting, and the system has to be perceived as useful for the learners. They need to see that they are actually both able to do it, because it's not too difficult, but that it's also challenging for them, so it's not too easy either, and that they're learning from it. So that by adjusting the level of challenge and difficulty to the right level, but providing feedback that is helping them to improve, those are the key elements. So really making sure that you have both interesting and useful tasks, adaptivity to the right level, corrective feedback, and scaffolding to make them able to do it.